Don't pretend you matter. Just leave. That's what my father said to me in front of everyone at his anniversary dinner. Hi, I'm Emily, 31. Quiet by nature, invisible by default, at least in my family. That night, something in me snapped. Or maybe finally clicked. I stood up, tapped my glass, and said one sentence that changed everything. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I stared at the message longer than I'd like to admit. Anniversary dinner, 6 p.m. Saturday. Everyone's expected. No, hope you can make it. No, hi, honey. Just a line of text from my father's number, clearly written by my mother. She was the only one who ever added those periods. I set the phone down beside my coffee cup, its screen glowing for a second before dimming again. Outside, Boise was edging into late October. The sidewalks were littered with amber and rust-colored leaves, and the mornings carried a kind of chill that clung to your sleeves. From my second-floor apartment above the bakery, I could already smell cinnamon and brown sugar wafting up from the ovens downstairs. I told myself I didn't care, that I'd deleted more messages from them than I could count. But this one sat there like a dare. At work the next morning, I was staring at a fabric swatch that refused to match anything when Chloe leaned over my desk. "You look like someone just offered you a job in Florida." I smiled faintly. "Worse, my family invited me to dinner." She raised a brow. "Voluntarily?" I nodded, showing her the message. "Oh," she said, reading it once. "That's cold. But maybe it's time?" "Time for what?" "Closure. Maybe you'll finally get to say all the things you wish you'd said." I didn't tell her I'd rehearsed those things 100 times before. In the shower, while washing dishes, once while standing in the toothpaste aisle at Target, and every time I'd lost my nerve before a single word left my lips. Chloe returned to her desk, but the thought stayed. Closure. That evening, I found myself wandering through the thrift shop on 8th Street. It was one of those places that smelled like dust and old books, the kind of place where stories waited quietly on every shelf. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw it, an old black and white photo shoved behind a stack of frames. It was our family, sometime in the early 90s, everyone still young and uncreased by resentment. Brad had a missing front tooth. I was holding a teddy bear almost half my size. The frame was chipped, the glass fogged, but I took it home. I spent that night cleaning the glass, sanding down the edges, and choosing a new frame. Walnut wood, simple, but polished. It was the kind of gift that carried effort in the quiet way I had always hoped someone would notice. By the time I finished, my fingers smelled faintly of varnish and lemon oil. The photo now sat upright on my kitchen counter, glowing softly in the amber light of the under-cabinet lamp. I stepped back and looked at it. We looked real, like a family. But even then, I knew better than to trust photographs. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in over 2 years, not since the last dinner where I spoke only once, and no one seemed to hear me. I left early that night, slipping out without a goodbye. No one followed. No one texted later to ask if I made it home safe. Maybe that was what stung the most. Not the loud moments of rejection, but the quiet confirmations of being unnecessary. After cleaning up the kitchen, I opened my closet and stared at the rows of carefully color-coded clothes. Nothing felt right. Nothing ever did when it came to them. I didn't want to look soft. I didn't want to look like I was apologizing just by existing. My hand landed on a dark green dress I'd bought 6 months ago on a whim. Structured shoulders, clean lines, no lace, no frill, just me, but sharper. I hung it on the back of my door, next to the gift. As I moved through my nighttime routine, watering the plant I kept forgetting existed, brushing my teeth, folding a load of laundry, I kept glancing back at that photo. Would they even recognize it? Would they remember the day it was taken? Would they remember the little girl in it? Just before bed, I wrapped the gift in brown craft paper and tied it with a thin ivory ribbon. Simple, quiet me. I placed it by the door and stood still for a moment, the kind of still that comes before a storm or a surrender. "I'll go," I whispered. "Just once more." I turned off the kitchen light, the room now dim except for the halo of streetlight coming through the blinds, and then I paused, hand on the switch. What am I really hoping for? I didn't know. But I knew that part of me, perhaps the part that still kept that photo all these years, hadn't given up entirely. And that, maybe, was the saddest part. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something older, like memory and distance. It hit me the second I stepped through the door, that familiar sharpness in the air, like every surface had been scrubbed twice, but still couldn't erase what lived in the walls. "Emily," my mother said, coming toward me with a half hug that didn't quite land. Her arms barely circled my shoulders before she pulled away, smoothing her blouse as if the gesture had wrinkled her. I glanced past her, already hearing voices in the dining room. Brad's laugh boomed above the rest, followed by someone else's chuckle I didn't recognize. The house looked exactly as I remembered, perfectly preserved, like someone had taken a photo 15 years ago and decided to never move a single thing since. The table was set for 14, long white cloth, polished silverware, a centerpiece of dried hydrangeas that matched the season. And at the far end, one seat was just slightly off-center, like it had been added at the last minute. My seat. I smiled thinly and stepped inside. My father was already seated at the head of the table, his back straight, his hands folded neatly in front of his plate. He didn't look up as I entered, just nodded once, sharp and small, like he was acknowledging the arrival of a UPS package, not his daughter. Linda motioned to my seat, farthest from the kitchen, closest to the window. "You can sit there, sweetie." Of course. I placed my coat on the back of the chair and set the wrapped gift down beside the centerpiece. No one commented, no one asked what it was. It just sat there, brown paper and ribbon, blending into the decorations like it was part of the furniture. Brad was in full storytelling mode, a glass of red wine in hand and 3 cousins hanging on his every word. He was retelling a summer vacation story, how he'd saved our neighbor's dog from running into traffic. I remembered that day differently. I remembered being the one who saw the dog bolt and shouted first, but in this version, I was invisible. Again. "I swear," Brad said, laughing. Mom screamed louder than the dog barked. Linda laughed on cue, hand fluttering to her chest. "Well, I was terrified. You were so brave, Brad." I watched the exchange in silence. A waitress at the wrong table. I tried to pour myself some water, but the pitcher was too far away. No one noticed. I folded my hands instead and stared at my napkin. "Emily," Brad said suddenly, turning toward me with a grin that felt too practiced. "You remember that day, right?" I blinked. "The dog?" "Yeah, you must have been, 8? 7. He laughed. Right. You were always so quiet back then. Not like now, huh?" His words landed soft but scraped on the way down. Everyone laughed politely. I forced a smile, then reached for my glass. The gift still sat untouched. My mother glanced at it once, then quickly looked away. More wine was poured. Plates clinked. Another cousin asked Brad about his new job in Denver. He launched into another story, this one about negotiating some big contract. My name didn't come up once. At one point, I cleared my throat. Actually, But Brad talked right over me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just smooth. A practiced deflection, like he knew exactly when to start speaking so I wouldn't have the space to finish. And once again, no one interrupted him. No one said, "Wait, what were you saying, Emily?" My voice fell back into my throat like it never belonged outside of it anyway. I looked around the table. Familiar faces, childhood photos grown older, but none of them really looked at me, not fully, not with any interest. My mother was nodding at something Brad had just said. My father had still not made eye contact. He sipped his wine, slow and calculated. I stared at my plate, then at my hands, then at the glass of water in front of me. Then I heard it. "Don't pretend you matter. Just leave." It came low and sharp, like a warning shot in a silent room. At first, I wasn't even sure I'd heard it right. But when I looked up, my father was still facing forward, still hadn't turned toward me. He didn't need to. His words had landed well enough without his eyes. Every fork paused. A cousin's hand froze mid-reach for a bread roll. My mother's smile disappeared in stages. First her lips, then her cheeks, then the light behind her eyes. Brad looked down like maybe the table had something to say. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there. It wasn't the words that stunned me. It was how unsurprised I was to hear them, how well they fit inside a narrative I'd been trying to rewrite for years. Silence stretched, thick and slow. I glanced around. No one spoke. No one said, "That's enough." No one said my name. I looked at the glass again, watched the condensation slide down its side like it was trying to escape. Then slowly, I lifted my fork and tapped it gently against the rim of the glass. Once, clear and deliberate. The sound cut clean through the room, sharper than anything Brad had said all night. My father's brow twitched. My mother blinked. Brad's smirk wavered. I stood, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape against the hardwood floor. The room didn't breathe. "I won't take much of your time," I said. And my voice, it didn't shake. The first sentence wasn't loud, but it hit the table harder than any fist. "I've loved this family with every part of me you all decided wasn't enough." My voice didn't rise. It didn't quiver. But it moved through the room like thunder rolling across a still lake. No one spoke. The candlelight flickered slightly, casting thin shadows across the plates. My mother blinked slowly, her hand hovering inches above her wine glass. Brad stopped chewing, his mouth still slightly open, like he'd been caught mid-thought. I let the words hang there. I didn't fill the silence. I let them settle like dust. Let them sting. "I've loved this family," I repeated. Softer, more to myself now. "With every part of me you all decided wasn't enough." The second sentence came like breath from lungs I hadn't realized were holding anything. "After tonight, you won't have to pretend I exist anymore." My father finally looked up. It wasn't anger I saw in his face. Not really. It was confusion. As if I'd broken a rule he didn't remember ever writing down but still expected me to follow. Brad glanced toward him, then toward me, then back again, eyes darting like someone watching a fuse burn too fast. And my mother. Her mouth moved as if to say something, but no sound came out. She just sat there, shoulders slightly caved in, the color rising slowly up her neck like spilled ink on a napkin. I picked up my glass, drank the last sip of water, and placed it down with care. My hands were steady. No one told me to sit. No one told me to stop. I walked slowly around the table, my heels tapping on the hardwood. Each step felt deliberate, like punctuation after long-winded sentences that never included me. No one followed. No one reached for my arm or said my name. At the entryway, I picked up my coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. The gift still sat in the middle of the table, unopened. I didn't take it with me. It wasn't mine anymore. As I reached the front door, I paused. I didn't turn all the way, just angled my head over my shoulder. My final sentence didn't rise above the sound of clinking forks or the hum of the heater, but it didn't need to. Take care of yourselves, because you won't get another chance to take care of me. Then I opened the door. The cold met me like a familiar friend, sharp, honest, and expected. It stung my cheeks and filled my lungs with something clean. Behind me, I heard the table legs creak. Someone set their glass down too hard. I stepped outside, letting the door fall closed behind me with a gentle thud that sounded, in my ears, like a final word. The porch light buzzed faintly. I stood still, letting the wind press against my coat. I didn't shiver. Inside, muffled by the door, came a dull thump. Probably my father's hand hitting the table. He had always preferred sound over words. Another voice, lower, grumbled something I couldn't catch. Likely Brad, still trying to explain the moment away before anyone could sit in its discomfort too long. But I was already walking. The driveway stretched before me, dotted with yellow leaves and pale patches of frost. My heels clicked softly against the concrete. With each step, the weight on my chest lessened. Not all at once, not like in stories where the pain vanishes in a single breath, but in pieces, quietly, kindly. I reached my car and paused. The cold had settled into my hands, but I didn't mind. I stood there for a moment, fingers resting on the door handle, listening to the faint sounds of dinner carrying on behind brick walls and closed blinds. They were already trying to move on. I could hear the forced chatter, the too loud laughter, the way people try to glue things back together before the cracks have even been acknowledged. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and shut it with a soft thump. The cabin was quiet, a cocoon of silence that felt more like safety than solitude. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there, hands resting in my lap, staring through the windshield at the soft glow of the porch light. It flickered slightly. No one came out. For a second, just a second, I let my eyes drift back to the house I had once called home. I thought of birthdays forgotten, phone calls unanswered, dinners where my name never made it into the conversation. I thought of the handmade Father's Day card I'd waited all day to give, the one I eventually left on his desk. It sat there for 3 days, unopened, before it disappeared. I thought of the 12th birthday where my mother baked me a crooked cake and said we were keeping it simple this year, just 1 year after Brad got balloons, pizza, and a brand new bike. I thought of every small, invisible moment that had led to this one. Then I blinked, and the memories faded like mist from a windshield. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, smooth and low. The headlights swept across the driveway, lighting up the front of the house. No movement, no figure in the window, no shadow on the porch. I shifted into drive, and I pulled away without looking back. The phone buzzed 4 times that night. I didn't answer once. It lit up the kitchen counter every few minutes, glowing soft against the dark granite. The sound wasn't urgent. It didn't scream or beg. Just a low vibration, like someone tapping on a window they knew I might not open. I was curled up on the couch, a blanket over my legs, the scent of cinnamon and pine drifting through the room from 2 candles flickering on the windowsill. Outside, Boise was slipping into early winter. The trees along 9th Street had shed most of their leaves, and the sky had taken on that heavy gray tint that meant snow would come soon, and stay. I didn't check the phone right away. I didn't need to. I knew who it was. Eventually, during a lull between sips of peppermint tea, I reached over and flipped the screen toward me. 1 missed call from Dad's cell. But the voicemail was hers. I could tell from the first breath. "Emily," my mother said, her voice tight and measured, "please just call me back. Please." She paused. "I know you're upset, but your father didn't mean... Well, maybe he didn't know how it sounded. Just call me." Click. I listened once, then deleted it. No hesitation, no saving it for later like I used to, thinking maybe I'd want to hear her voice again someday. A few minutes later, a text from Brad lit up the screen. "Brad Carter. Mom's upset. Dad's furious. Just come back, say something." I stared at it longer than I should have. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were the same middle ground I'd lived in my whole life. Vague responsibility, no real accountability. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the Carter family group chat, Carter Crew, and scrolled back through weeks of silence. The last message before the dinner had been a meme Brad sent about someone burning a turkey. No one had responded, not even a ha. I hovered my thumb over the screen, then tapped, "Leave conversation." The phone gave me one final prompt. "Are you sure you want to leave this group?" "Yes." I set it down and turned away before it could blink again. The apartment was quiet but not hollow. It felt honest. There was no tension clinging to the corners, no undercurrent of expectation humming beneath the silence, just the soft tick of the clock above my kitchen sink and the occasional groan of the old radiator kicking in. The next morning, I met Chloe for coffee at our usual spot off Grove Street. It was the kind of place with exposed brick, real mugs and baristas who remembered your name without making it weird. I was early, so I grabbed the corner table near the window and watched the people pass by in coats and scarves, their breath visible in little puffs. When Chloe arrived, she slid into the chair across from me and didn't say anything right away, just gave me a look, the kind that says, "You don't have to explain if you don't want to." Finally, she leaned in. "So?" I wrapped my hands around the mug. "He told me to leave." She blinked. "What?" I nodded. He said, "Don't pretend you matter, just leave." Chloe exhaled slowly. Damn. I took a sip of coffee. No one stopped me. Not even Mom. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it. "Like I'm not holding my breath anymore," I said. "Like I stopped waiting for something that was never coming." She smiled, soft and sad. "That's freedom, you know. It's quiet, but it's real." Later that day, back at my apartment, I lit a candle and sat by the window with my journal, the one I'd bought but hadn't dared write in yet. The pages still smelled faintly of paper and something herbal from the shop where I found it. I opened to the first page. The pen hovered for a moment before I wrote, "I don't owe anyone my silence ever again." I underlined the sentence once. That night, I turned off my phone and put it in the drawer beside the matches and old birthday cards I never threw away. The drawer clicked shut with a satisfying sound, not loud, just final. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and crawled into bed without checking messages, without worrying someone might be trying to reach me. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't scroll. I didn't brace for another email, another voicemail, another ask for me to be smaller. I just slept. And when morning came, the world outside my window had changed. A thin layer of snow dusted the railing of the fire escape. The sky was pale, almost silver. Everything looked softer. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and whispered to myself, "This peace feels earned." And I meant it. It started with a thrift store frame and a photo I actually liked. Not one of those glossy, posed studio portraits where you're supposed to smile like nothing hurts. This was a picture Chloe took, me sitting in the little corner of my apartment where the sunlight hits just right, reading a book, half laughing at something she said, unfiltered, fully in the frame. I printed it at the corner drugstore and slipped it into a wooden frame I'd found for $2. The wood was chipped on one corner, but it felt warm, lived in, honest. I placed it on my bookshelf, next to a half-dead succulent and a candle that smelled like clove and vanilla. Every time I passed it, I smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. December came with its familiar hush. Boise in full winter was quiet in a way I hadn't learned to appreciate until now. The sidewalk sparkled with frost in the mornings, and downtown lit up with string lights that made even the cold feel a little softer. Every Saturday, I walked to the farmer's market wrapped in my oversized coat and boots that had finally broken in just right. And every Saturday, I bought flowers from Margot, the vendor with silver hair and the warmest eyes. She never asked questions, never pried, just tucked an extra sprig of lavender into my bouquet and said, "For calm." I always smiled. "Thank you, Margot." It became a rhythm. Buy flowers, light candles, make tea, write a page in my journal, not about them, about me, what I saw, what I felt, what I hoped for. One snowy Tuesday, I wandered back into Grace's bookstore for the first time in years. The bell over the door chimed, and she looked up from behind the counter like I'd never left. "You always had good taste," she said, nodding at the stack of books in my arms. I laughed, still trying to read my way into peace. Grace tilted her head. "Sometimes we read to find ourselves. Sometimes just to remember we're still here." I didn't say much else. She didn't need me to. A few days later, I stood in a watercolor class filled with strangers and fear. The kind of fear that isn't loud but shows up as hesitation. I hadn't painted since high school, and even then I was too afraid of getting it wrong. The instructor walked by, saw me frowning at a blue sky that didn't look quite right, and said, "There's no wrong way to see the world. You just have to keep painting until it feels like yours." So I did. The paintings weren't beautiful, but they were mine. Soft, blurred lines, skies that bled into trees, a coffee cup, a window, a hand holding lavender. I began to decorate my apartment, not with things that were meant to impress, but with pieces that reflected back parts of me I was learning to love. I posted a photo one evening, nothing special, just a picture of the painting I'd hung near my window. The caption read, "Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop sitting where you were never invited." I didn't expect a response, but a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years replied, "I see you." And later that night, an aunt I barely remembered sent a private message. Took me 40 years to get there too. Proud of you. The next morning, I found a white envelope in my mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. I stood at the kitchen counter, fingers resting on the flap. The kettle hissed in the background, but I didn't move. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Eventually, I opened it. It was one page, folded carefully. The ink smudged in one corner as if from a hesitant hand or a tear that dried too late. My mother's words were short. No greetings, no explanations. Just this. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I see it now." That was it. No apology, no requests. Just a single sentence that hung in the air long after I placed the letter on the table. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the snow begin to fall in slow spirals. Then I opened the drawer in the living room, the one where I kept a bundle of dried lavender Margot had given me weeks ago. I placed the letter beside it. Not as something precious, just something finished. I used to think healing would look like a reunion, some kind of big dramatic moment where everyone finally understood, finally said sorry, finally pulled out a chair just for me. Turns out it looked like a potluck with 3 mismatched chairs and a chipped salad bowl. It was a Friday in March. Boise had finally started to thaw. The sidewalks were damp but no longer frozen, and little green shoots were pushing their way through the earth like they were tired of hiding. My apartment smelled like lemon and roasted garlic. I'd opened the windows earlier that afternoon to let in the breeze, and the yellow curtains I hung in January fluttered softly every time the wind passed through. Chloe arrived first, carrying a loaf of homemade focaccia still warm in the dish towel. Grace followed with a bottle of red wine and a tiny chocolate tart she claimed wasn't fancy, but looked like it belonged in a magazine. Margot brought flowers, of course, tulips and daisies wrapped in brown paper, stems still dewy. We didn't talk about my family. Not once. No one asked, "Have you heard from them?" or "Are things better now?" It was like they understood without asking that the story had moved on. Dinner was noisy in the best way, clinking glasses, overlapping conversations, and soft jazz humming beneath it all. At one point, Chloe raised her glass and said, "To tables we choose, not tables we beg to sit at." I laughed louder than I expected to. Later that night, after the last dish was dried and the last hug exchanged, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter, holding my phone. One voicemail. Brad. I pressed play. "Emily," he began, his voice lower than I remembered. "We were talking about you the other night. It's weird not having you around. Mom cries sometimes. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. I thought you were just being dramatic." He paused. There was a sound like he shifted in a chair. "I don't know if you'll ever want to come back, but I hope you're okay." I listened until the line went quiet. Then I deleted it, not out of anger, just because I didn't need to keep it. The next day, at watercolor class, I painted something bold, reds and oranges and cobalt blues that bled into one another. No outlines, no structure, just color, emotion, freedom. When the teacher passed behind me, she paused. "That's brave," she said. I smiled. "It's me." At home, I took down the old photo in the thrifted frame, the one Chloe had taken months ago, and replaced it with a new one. I'd taken it myself this time, using the timer and a stack of books. The light hit just right. I was laughing, hair a little messy, eyes squinting in that way that only happens when the smile is real. I put it on the bookshelf next to my lavender and journal. Later that week, walking home from the market with tulips in one hand and a fresh baguette tucked under my arm, I caught my reflection in the entryway mirror. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. For a long time, I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize who I saw. Or worse, I saw someone always trying to be softer, smaller, easier to love. But now, I just saw me. At home, I lit a candle, poured tea into my favorite chipped mug, and opened my journal to a clean page. Wrote, "I don't miss them. I miss who I wanted them to be, but I'm finally learning to love who I actually am." Then I added slowly, carefully, like a blessing spoken aloud for no one but myself, "I'm not angry. I'm free." I used to believe healing had to come from someone else, from their apology, their change, their reaching out. But peace came when I stopped waiting and chose to become whole on my own. Sometimes, love isn't about returning to the table we were pushed away from. It's about building one that welcomes who we truly are. If we can learn to stop shrinking for the comfort of others, we might finally make space to grow. If this story touched a part of you, I'd love to hear what it brought up. Your thoughts, your memories, those are welcome at this table.